Are you rich? Right now, where you sit. Are you rich? When you look around, you may not feel so rich. But what if we looked a little further than our own backyard? Here in Naperville, the median yearly income is around $120,000. That's not Bill Gates rich. But how does it compare with the rest of the world? Turns out, we're rich, and the top 0.06% of the world's wealth. But that's just the median. What if I made only $17,000 a year? Look at that. At $17,000 a year, you're still in the top 5% of the richest people in the world. So if you can see this right now, maybe on a computer or in a weekend service, if you have a car, a house, or an apartment, if you eat out at least once a week, yep, you're rich. We're rich. And it's time to start acting like it.
What's your first kind of knee-jerk reaction to what you just saw? If you're anything like me, it's something along the lines of, I don't care what the stats say, I am not rich. Who's with me on that? I mean, I get it that I have a whole lot more than people who live in other parts of the world, but hearing how little other people have doesn't make me feel like I have a lot. I mean, that's my reaction. But maybe that's just me. So I showed it to some other people to get their reaction. I asked a server at a restaurant, and I asked a neighbor, and I asked my wife. The server, she said maybe it was true, but she felt like it was probably something some charity made up to guilt her into donating. And then she said, "So are you like a pastor or something?" My neighbor, he said his tax return says that the government clearly seems to think he's rich. And my wife said, simply, well, if that's true, we're the poorest rich people she knows. We showed that same quick little video thing last weekend, and we showed it again today. And spoiler alert, we're going to show it again next weekend. Because there's this thing that God says in the Bible that is super important. But most of us would think it's not for us. Here it is. It says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life." And so we did that video about how we compare to the rest of the world, because the Scripture says that this is for those who are rich in the present world. I mean, notice it doesn't say those who are rich compared to their neighbors, or those who are rich compared to their friends or family or the other people in their company or their town. It says those who are rich in the present world. So the bottom line is, if you're here today, quick show of hands, how many of you are here today? Just checking. If you're here today and you have a place to live and food on the table and can afford to go out to eat at even a cheap restaurant, these words really are for you. They're for us. It doesn't say, command those who feel like they're rich. It says those who are rich in the present world. And in terms of our present world, odds are pretty good that this is speaking to most everybody here today. Because truth is, even if I'm in debt up to my eyeballs or have an incredible mountain of bills to pay every month, if I do have food, shelter, clothing, and money at all beyond that, in this present world, I'm rich. If I've got a car, a home, and a computer, I got more than 98% of all the people on the planet. I'm rich in this present world. But don't worry, we're not saying this to make anybody feel guilty or to do anything like that. Here's the point. The stuff that God is saying here is so good, we don't want anybody that it applies to miss it. Because if we have enough money for food, shelter, clothing, a car, and a computer, God's speaking to us right now because we've been given a very, very special opportunity. I mean, if you've been around here very long at all, you've probably heard us talk about how we want to be a community who lives our lives every day to bless those around us. We want to bless others in just all sorts of tangible, practical, and real ways, because we realize how much we've been blessed by God. And we want to then be God's blessing to others in the world in whatever ways we can. And sure, folks who are not rich in this present world can bless others. They can do it too. But folks who are rich in the present world have a special opportunity to bless. And the opportunity is highlighted there. What that opportunity is, it's highlighted for us there at the end of these verses. It speaks to those who are rich in the present world, and then it tells them how to live as rich people in the present world. And then it says this. It says, in this way, meaning when you do what God says for rich in the present world kind of people to do, in this way, they, meaning you, us, you will lay up treasure for themselves, for yourselves, as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that you may take hold of life that is truly life. Now, got to understand something that I think most of us don't think about very often. God's saying something big time here. God is saying the age we live in now isn't going to be forever. The age, the world we live in now isn't all there is. In fact, it's not even close to most of what there is. Because, see, an age is coming when things are going to be very different. An age is coming, friends, when things are going to be set to rights. An age is coming when this old sin-sick, messed up world is going to be renewed and restored and healed. And it'll become how it was meant to be in the first place. And when that age comes, when God sets things to rights, things are going to stay that way. That age will be forever. And that last line from the scripture there, that these words are so that we can take hold of life that's truly life, that's what God wants for us. I mean, is there anybody here today who does not want life that is truly life? I mean, would anybody prefer life that's not truly life? You know, life that's flimsy and unsubstantial and fake? Anybody prefer that? Any takers on that? So we're continuing with what God says today to people who are rich in the present world. Last weekend we talked about how God says to us who have more than most people in the world to make sure that we are also rich in good deeds. That was last weekend. And then the next part, which is this weekend, God says to make sure and be rich in generosity. And yeah, generosity is about money. Not too long ago, after we did a talk on generosity, a guy came up to me, good guy, I really like him, and he said, why do you guys say generosity and then only talk about money? There's other kinds of generosity. I'm generous with my time and my talents. That's generosity too. And I do see his point, and we do want people, we do encourage people to be generous with their time and talents. However, it's really interesting to me that if you look in the Bible, every single time the word generous is used, it has to do with giving of money or its equivalent for the sake of those in need. I mean, don't get me wrong. It is great to give your time, and it's good to give your talents generously. But when the Bible says to be generous here, the Bible is clearly not talking about giving of your time and talents. It's talking about, the bucks, dough, dinero, moolah, cheese, cheddar, whatever you want to call it, this stuff. And the opportunity to live generously, it isn't something God doesn't want. What I'm trying to say, it isn't something that God doesn't want people who are rich in this present world to miss out on. He doesn't want us to miss out on it. Because living in a generous life is a key way to lay hold of the life that's truly life. Or to put it more simply, when God calls us to financial generosity for the Jesus mission, He doesn't want something from us. He wants something for us. But I know that can sound like, just some sort of line from a preacher guy like me. So don't take it from me. Don't. Here's a story that Jesus told to illustrate the point. And I got to tell you in advance, it's kind of a strange story that doesn't get preached or taught on that often in church. And maybe as I read it, you might see why. Here's what Jesus says. He says, a rich man once had a manager take care of his business, but he was told that the manager was wasting money. So the rich man called him in and said, what is this I hear about you? Tell me what you've done. You are no longer going to work for me. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now that my master is going to fire me? I can't dig ditches, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that people will welcome me into their homes after I've lost my job. Then one by one, he called in the people who were in debt to his master. He asked the first one, how much do you owe my master? 100 barrels of olive oil, the man answered. So the manager said, "Take your bill and sit down and quickly write 50." The manager asked someone else who was in debt to his master, "How much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels a wheat, the man replied. The manager said, "Take your bill and write 800." The master praised his dishonest manager for looking out for himself so well. You get the picture right here. The manager guy knows he's on the way out, that his days are numbered. So he does all he can do to make sure that there'll be plenty of people who are really glad to see him when his days as a manager are over. People who will welcome him into their homes and where they live. And maybe you can see why this doesn't get taught on that often. Because at first blush, Jesus seems to be telling the story of a guy who's dishonest and then gets praised for it. I mean, it seems like Jesus is telling us to be like the guy in the story, the dishonest guy. But obviously, or at least I hope obviously, that's not what Jesus is saying. In fact, Jesus comes right out and interprets the parable for us. He says, after telling the story, he says this. He says, "I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings." Somebody say eternal dwellings. Eternal dwellings. Those last two words are the key words in the whole deal. And they're also the key words in understanding what it means to be rich and generous in generosity. Those last two words, which are good, eternal dwellings. Now, what are eternal dwellings? I mean, is that like really, really well-built, low-maintenance houses? No. Eternal dwellings is a reference to the age that is to come. When eternity begins and the things that will last are all there'll be. Not the stuff that'll fade away and perish. Jesus says when it's all gone, all this stuff we have or had or tried to have, when it's all gone, what will remain is how we used it to determine what relationships we will have in eternity. Eternal dwellings means heaven, the age that's to come, eternity. As I was working on this talk, I found out something that I did not know. I found out that Steve Jobs, legendary Apple founder, and Bill Gates, richest guy in the world, kind of big kahuna, Microsoft, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, I found out that they've known each other really well since all the way back in the 70s. In fact, they did this interview, and in this interview they did together, Gates went as far as to say that as businessmen that they grew up together. And I saw this interview, and Jobs was talking about Gates. And Gates was right there on the stage, and Jobs said this. Steve Jobs said this about Bill Gates. He said, "I think the world's a better place because Bill realized that his goal isn't to be the richest guy in the cemetery." As you might know, Bill and Melinda Gates have given away more money for the good of others than anybody else in the world. And it's so ironic that Steve Jobs would say that about Gates, because Steve Jobs was not known for using his wealth to help others. And he ended up becoming, well, let's just call an ace here. He ended up becoming one of the richest guys in the cemetery. It's tragic, really. See, that's what Jesus is talking about here. But not just in a general way when it comes to generosity for the general good of others. He's talking particularly about using your finances, using my finances as best as you can to help people find their way back to God. Because even though we don't like to be reminded of it, our days in this current age are numbered. And generosity now can result in people finding their way back to God and being in heaven who might not have otherwise been there. So people who will welcome you into eternal dwellings are people who found their way back to God in part because of your financial generosity. I mean, let's be really clear. We are all saved by grace through faith in Jesus. So this isn't about that. But it is saying that for the person who is generous with the Jesus mission in this life, there's going to be a special welcoming committee in the coming age, in the life that is to come, the life that's truly life. And I want to pause right here for just a second and encourage everybody to try to do their best to wrap their heads and hearts around this reality. Okay, here it is. Your generosity might be the thing that makes the difference in how someone else spends their eternity. Think about that. Man, that is so huge. That is just so incredibly like mind-blowingly profound. But I hope more than anything else to you, it's attractive. I mean, come on. If you could use your financial resources in such a way that it resulted in somebody going to heaven instead of hell, if your generosity could play a part in that, wouldn't you want it to? Well, if you do want it to and you're interested in that and you're attracted to that possibility, here's 3 quick things that parable that Jesus told of the shrewd manager. 3 things that it tells us that'll help us be generous, rich in generosity. First, for the person who wants to take hold of life that's really life, money is a tool. And like any tool, when you know how to use it, it can be incredibly effective. There are things that no amount of donated time or talents can accomplish. So let me say something to folks who consider themselves part of this church. Every time we give back to God, we are investing in something. And every time we see somebody get baptized or become an apprentice leader or start a new small group, every time we launch a new campus or have a support and recovery meeting that's centered around the hope that people can find in Jesus, every time a little boy or little girl walks into a classroom and has fun learning about Jesus, that's our investment paying dividends. For Christ followers, money is a lot of things, but one of the most important things it is a tool, an investment vehicle, a temporary means to an eternal end. That's how the manager used the money in Jesus' story, and that's how Jesus wants money used in our stories too. Money is a tool. Second thing is money is a test. Money is a test. Now, I don't mean test like, pass, fail, what grade did you get, something like that. I mean test like a litmus test, something that shows that tells us where we're really at. The way we use our money is a test for where our heart is. Jesus said that himself. He said clearly, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. How many remember from back in school days studying the Battle of Waterloo? Yeah, one of the most famous battles of all time. When Napoleon, who everybody thought was unbeatable, was finally beaten. Well, as you may recall, the general who defeated Napoleon at Waterloo was this guy named Wellington. And a biographer claims to have the most authoritative account of Wellington's life out of all the biographies that have been written. And he claims his is the most authoritative one because he wrote it based on Wellington's financial statements. And I don't know about you, but it interests me that maybe the clearest picture of what somebody's life is about is their checkbook. That the clearest indication of what my life is about is my checkbook, my bank statement, my credit card statement. See, money's not just a tool, it's a test, a clear indication of what we're about. So money is a tool, money is a test, and then last but not least, money's a trademark. Trademarks are interesting. Show you a simple picture, and I guarantee you'll know who it stands for. Here's the first one. Who's that? Right. All right. Here's the second one. Who's that? Right. And then the third one. That's really easy. Fourth one. Almost as easy. But most importantly, this one. Got to get a little more mileage out of the Blackhawks Stanley Cup championship. Anyhow, real simple. Money given generously so others can find their way back to God is as good a trademark as there is for Christ's followers. Money is a trademark. Listen to this story.
When the All In series was coming to a conclusion, there was the time to make a financial commitment, and Sean had talked about All In coming from a variety of sources, whether it be current income, but also out of stored resources. And when you start thinking about giving up something as opposed to money, there's a little different flavor to that. And that's when I started thinking about, well, maybe it's time for me to give up my Harley Davidson. So for me, looking back, the purchase of a Harley Davidson would clearly qualify as an impulse purchase. I really didn't ride it a whole lot, but it was awfully fun to tell people that I had one. I took some pictures of my bike out in the driveway with snow in the background and put it up on eBay, and believe it or not, it sold within 2 days. So I think God was looking down and was agreeing with my decision. There is a Bible verse that always makes me a little bit squeamish. I'd say it's my least favorite Bible verse, and that's Matthew 19, where the rich man that's very compliant, goes to church all the time, tithes, goes up and asks Jesus, what else can I do to be perfect? Or, how can I earn my way to heaven? And Jesus looks at him and says, if you want to be perfect, sell all your possessions and give to the poor, then you'll have treasure in heaven. And that really was what was going through my mind at the time. Is let's not be so clung to our possessions that we become associated with and almost identify with what we own, as opposed to why we're really here. And so it was a pretty powerful moment for me, even though it's just a motorcycle, to say I'm going to give this up, and it's part of not being a consumer anymore. I want to get back in ways above and beyond.
And maybe you don't have anything cool like that to sell, and selling stuff isn't the takeaway today anyways, necessarily. It's just a great illustration of what generosity for the sake of others finding their way back to God looks like in one guy's life. And here's what we believe generosity is meant to look like for all of us. I like how this one particular contemporary translation of the Bible puts it. I like this. God says, I am the Lord all-powerful, and I challenge you to put me to the test. Bring the entire 10% into my storehouse, then I'll open up the windows of heaven and flood you with blessing after blessing. And I know, the whole 10% tithing thing, it gets a lot of people kind of in a bunch. But let me just say, if you can't tithe right now, that's okay. Just start taking steps in that direction. Start thinking of money as a tool, a test, and a trademark as a Christ follower. And start allocating what you do have to start moving in that direction. Tithing doesn't necessarily make me generous, but it is a great place to start or to start moving toward. But most of all, folks, remember what this is about. I mean, I know I am a flawed, messed up, selfish as the next person, but that I could come to the end of my days in this life and then be standing face to face with even one person that's in heaven because of how I used money. I mean, that does something to me. No matter what, I know I will be able. I know I'm going to be able to have done more, but that's not the point. The point is that I really want to hear God say, "You did so much, don't you?" May you and may we all be rich in generosity.